The moment Calla asked the question, the knife paused mid-air over the cutting board. "When did I lose you?" Aaron didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He stared at her like she was someone else entirely, like her voice didn't match the woman he married. He wiped his hands with a linen towel, set it down gently beside the bowl of pasta she'd made from scratch, and walked out the front door. He never touched the food. He never looked back. And that was the last time Calla heard the sound of his footsteps upstairs. Have you ever stood across from someone you loved and felt like a stranger in their eyes? Comment below if you've seen a relationship slowly fade, not from rage, but from silence. Like this story if you believe some truths hurt, but they're still necessary. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more powerful tales that speak to real hearts. Let's get into it. The wedding ring was on the counter by morning. That was how she knew it was over. Not with a fight, not with screams, with nothing. Calla Vale stood in the center of the kitchen, the one she designed herself, tile by tile, and stared at the ring like it had teeth. It didn't belong there. But then again, neither did she anymore. Her phone buzzed. Her sister, again. Still no word from him? Calla didn't answer. What was there to say? Aaron Vale was halfway across the world by now. Singapore, if she remembered correctly. He'd mentioned a deal. Another acquisition. A new data company under the Vale banner. She hadn't asked for details, and he hadn't offered any. Aaron Vale was known for many things. Sharpened suits, sharper instincts, and an empire that touched everything from skyscrapers to satellites. But 6 years ago, on a rain-slicked corner in Soho, he was just a man, wearing a white suit with fresh crimson paint dripping down his front. Her fault. She was hauling canvases toward a street exhibit when one slipped. She tried to catch it, failed, and splashed an entire bottle of raw red pigment across his custom jacket. Calla had braced for fury, for entitlement, for the kind of cold, rich lecture that made artists feel small. Instead, he looked down at the mess, then up at her, those grey eyes barely blinking. "You just improved it," he said, smiling. He paid for every canvas she'd brought that day, didn't take a single one home. But he returned the next morning. No security, no assistant, no suit, just jeans, a t-shirt, and a quiet, confident grin. "Coffee?" he asked her. She said no, so he bought 2 cups and sat next to her booth anyway. They fell hard, fast. He called her the chaos his world needed. She called him the first man who didn't try to own her. They married 8 months later, a private ceremony on a rooftop overlooking the Hudson. No press, no gowns, no staged perfection. She wore her mother's earrings. He wore his father's cufflinks. They made a vow to stay grounded, no matter how high his legacy climbed. And for a while, they did. Now, 5 years in, their penthouse was silent. The chef had been dismissed. The cleaner didn't come that day. Just Calla, a half-boiled pot of water, and the heavy ring left in plain sight. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did what she always did when emotion threatened to bury her. She painted, not for the gallery, not for show, for survival. The colors on the canvas blurred. Rage didn't fuel her brush, guilt did, because Aaron hadn't walked away suddenly. He had been retreating in small steps for months. First came the missed dinners, then the unspoken silences, then the moved pillow to the downstairs guest room. By the time she noticed she was alone, he was already gone in spirit. But last night had sealed it. Calla had cooked. It was rare, but she'd felt a pull, a need to break the pattern, to reach for something real. She made lemon pasta from scratch, lit candles, even wore the perfume he once told her reminded him of rain on stone. When he walked in, she met him at the door. He looked tired, not angry, just drained. She offered him a glass of wine. He declined. She tried small talk. He gave small nods. And when she asked him the question she had rehearsed for weeks, "When did I lose you?" He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't flinch. He looked at her, just looked, then walked out. Now she stood over a cold stovetop, wedding ring between her fingers, and 100 questions screaming in her mind. Did he leave her because of Julian? Did he know? Did he feel betrayed before she even crossed any lines? The thing was, she hadn't. Not technically, but she remembered the way Julian looked at her paintings. She remembered how easy it was to laugh with him, to feel heard, seen. She remembered how she avoided eye contact when Aaron came home. And she remembered, most of all, how she started to feel like someone else's attention made her feel more alive than her own husband's. Even though he never once stopped providing, never once raised his voice, never once abandoned her in public. But emotionally, yes, he had walked away long before she admitted it. And maybe, he did that because she gave him a reason to. Her phone pinged that evening with a message from Julian. "Your painting, the one with the two birds facing away from each other. It's devastating. You okay?" She had smiled at the text. She remembered that. She even typed, "I'm fine," then deleted it. Typed again. "You saw that?" His reply, "I see everything you don't say." Calla placed the ring back on the counter. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. Then, without thinking, walked back to her art studio. If Aaron wanted space, she'd give it. If he wanted peace, she'd create it. But deep down, she knew that kind of truth doesn't end a day. It ends an era. Aaron watched the city blur past the tinted windows of his car as it pulled away from the penthouse. The skyline was the same, always had been, but he didn't feel the same in it anymore. The moment Calla asked that question, "When did I lose you?" something inside him closed. Not because he didn't love her, but because he couldn't recognize her anymore. He leaned back, loosened his collar, and rested his arm against the door. His phone buzzed with updates from overseas. Singapore was already awake. A $60 million bid on a fiber tech merger had landed earlier than expected. His team was expecting a decision. He didn't even glance at it. Aaron Vale had spent the last 6 years building legacy on top of legacy. But that night, all he could think about was a sidewalk, a spilled canvas, and a girl who once made him believe love could exist outside contracts. Calla was never supposed to fade. He didn't walk out of the house because of what she said. He walked out because she didn't already know the answer. The truth had been hanging in every missed dinner, every night he slept downstairs. Every time she turned her body away from him when she thought he was asleep. He had felt her go first. In pieces, in signals, in shifts. She used to hum in the mornings. She stopped. She used to leave paint smudges on his notes. They stopped showing up. She used to look at him like he wasn't a billionaire, but like he was just Aaron. That gaze was long gone. Now she looked at him like he was something to be endured, something she had to tiptoe around. And then came Julian. He wasn't surprised by him. Aaron knew the type. Quiet charm, creative, effortless compliments with just the right amount of interest. He probably wore linen suits and talked about texture and emotion, like it was science. But it wasn't jealousy that hardened Aaron's chest. It was something else. Calla had once made Aaron feel like the safest man in the room, like no version of himself had to be edited for her, and yet somehow she gave that version of herself to someone else. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally, completely. He didn't need texts or photos. He didn't snoop through her phone. He watched the changes. The way she smiled after checking her screen. The way she started brushing her hair again before going to casual meetings. The way she held back comments around him, but laughed freely with Julian in public functions. At first, Aaron blamed himself. He thought maybe he was working too much. Maybe he hadn't been present. Maybe the miscarriage had broken something in both of them he didn't have the words to fix. So he gave her space. He cancelled 2 business trips to stay home. She never noticed. He booked a getaway to Vermont. She said she had art program deadlines. She didn't even ask him what hotel he had chosen. That one stung. So Aaron did what powerful men do when they can't control pain. He buried it. Buried it beneath spreadsheets, takeovers, and press conferences. buried it behind polished smiles and guarded glances. And when Julian showed up more frequently, invited or not, Aaron stopped fighting. Because what was the point? You don't fight for someone who's already chosen silence over honesty. On the flight to Singapore, Aaron barely spoke. His team thought he was reviewing contracts. He wasn't. He was looking at a deed. The ownership transfer of the art studio he secretly bought for her 2 years earlier. When she told him she wanted to expand her youth program, she didn't know he'd made it happen behind the scenes. She thought the city approved her proposal based on merit. He never told her otherwise. He never wanted praise. He just wanted her to keep painting, to keep feeling. Now, he was signing it all over, every brick, every light bulb, every dollar spent on the remodel, not out of bitterness, but because even though she had let go of them, he hadn't let go of her. He wanted her to be free, even if it meant setting himself aside. He remembered their last real kiss, not the mechanical peck on the cheek, not the obligated goodbye before events, but the kind of kiss that paused the world. It was on their 3rd anniversary. She'd burned dinner. They ordered ramen. They sat barefoot on the balcony, her head on his shoulder, soup cartons between them. He remembered her saying, "I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who fell for a man in a boardroom." He told her, "I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd break if she left." At the time, they both laughed, but he meant every word. Back in the present, Aaron handed the signed deed to his assistant. "Send this to her," he said. "No return address." His assistant hesitated. "Will she know it's from you?" Aaron nodded once. "She'll know." He didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not his sister, not his business partner, not even his lawyer. He didn't want a divorce battle. He didn't want the house. He didn't want the narrative. He just wanted to disappear from the story, without hurting the woman who helped him write its best chapters. If she ever came back, it would have to be because she reached out. He wouldn't chase. Not because he didn't love her, but because he finally realized, you can't chase what already chose to leave. Before the jet door closed, Aaron looked at the skyline one last time. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the city was already alive. Lights blinking, horns echoing below. Somewhere in that skyline, Calla was waking up. Maybe she was still in the kitchen, staring at the ring. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she wouldn't. But whatever happened next, he wouldn't be there to see it. And that hurt more than he expected. It was the kind of accident that could have ended most artists' careers. Rain, wind, a crowded Soho corner, and a 6-foot-tall man in a spotless white suit, ruined by a falling canvas and an explosion of crimson acrylic. The crowd gasped. Calla Mireille froze. The canvas had slipped from her grip as she turned to answer a vendor. The wind carried it with terrifying precision, straight into the chest of a stranger whose shoes probably cost more than her week's rent. She rushed forward, apologized, blurted out something about paint being mostly washable, and then looked up. The man didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't even blink. He looked down at the red streaks dripping from his jacket sleeve, then up at her again, his lips slowly curving. "You just improved it," he said. That was the first thing Aaron Vale ever said to her. She blinked. "Improved it?" He nodded. Was missing something bold. "Now I look like a modern tragedy, or a misunderstood hero." Calla stared at him, confused, a little suspicious, still gripping the soaked edge of her ruined canvas. "Are you okay?" "I'm better now." He said it without flirtation, without bravado, just calm certainty. That made her nervous. He left soon after, bought every piece of art in her booth, didn't negotiate price, didn't ask questions, paid in cash, then walked off into the crowd without telling her his name. It was only the next day, when he returned, coffee in one hand, folded newspaper in the other, that she realized who he was. "Morning," he said, placing the cup beside her new stack of canvases. "No paint this time, I hope." She narrowed her eyes. "You came back. I never leave anything unfinished." She raised a brow. "Like what?" "My humiliation." He laughed. "No, Your perspective. He sat beside her. Didn't ask for permission. Didn't need it. And for the first time in a long while, Calla didn't feel the need to defend her space. The papers had written about him often. Aaron Vale, the hotel prince turned investment juggernaut. Heir to the Vale luxury line, yet famously private. Rumored to have dated models, actresses, even a minor royal. But sitting on a plastic crate beside her street exhibit, drinking black coffee and tossing crumbs to pigeons, he looked more like a misplaced philosophy professor. He asked questions, not about her art, but about her hands. How long have you had those calluses? She blinked. Excuse me? Your index finger. Looks like you hold your brushes too tight. She shrugged. Sometimes you have to fight the canvas to get the truth out. He looked at her, dead serious. That's the most honest thing I've heard all week. They talked for 2 hours that day. About color theory, about public school art programs, about how both of them hated being asked what they did for a living, like it defined them. He didn't mention his wealth. She didn't mention her past. It was easy, too easy. So she lied when he asked for her number, told him she didn't give it out. Instead, she said, "If you're serious, you'll find me again." He smiled. "Is that a challenge?" "No," she said, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "It's a test." He stood, straightened his jacket. "Good. I like exams." He showed up 3 days later, again, this time at an evening gallery where she had a single painting tucked in the back corner of a group showcase. He didn't walk around the room. He walked straight to hers. When she turned and saw him standing in front of it, hands behind his back, not touching, just staring, she paused. He didn't speak until she approached. This one feels like something you're not saying out loud." She tilted her head. "It's about leaving home." Without resentment, he nodded. "That's rare." "You think so?" "I know so." She crossed her arms. "You ever leave anything behind?" His expression shifted. Not cold, just still. "My mother." The words dropped like stones, but he didn't explain, didn't elaborate, just asked her if she'd like a drink. She said yes. Their first date was a rooftop, not his, hers. The roof of her friend's 5th floor walk-up. Blankets, cheap beer, a speaker playing low jazz, and Chinese takeout eaten with their fingers. They didn't talk about success. They didn't talk about galleries or stock options or families. They talked about silence. The kind that follows big decisions. The kind that creeps into rooms when love shifts. He asked if she believed in forever. She said she believed in honesty. He smiled. That's rarer than forever. By the 3rd week, he knew her coffee order, the name of her first pet, and why she never painted faces without shadows. By the 5th, she knew the real reason he never let photographers catch him smiling. His father had always told him, "Smile, and they'll think they can take something from you." He hated that lesson. He just didn't know how to unlearn it. But with her, he tried. They made no announcements. There was no proposal. One afternoon, while they were in line at a hardware store buying frames for her new studio, he asked casually, "Do you want to do this officially?" She blinked. "Like, as a couple?" He tilted his head. "Like, as a team?" She didn't smile. She just whispered, Yeah, I do." They married quietly 2 months later. A rooftop again. Different one this time. Smaller, more private. Only her sister, his cousin, and the officiant. She wore flats. He wore his father's cufflinks. She kissed him before the vows were over. He laughed into her lips. That night, they didn't talk about forever. They just made it feel real. And for the first 2 years, it was unstaged, unforced, unshakable. They had movie nights on beanbags, got food poisoning from street tacos, fought over whether the plants on the balcony were dying from heat or neglect. But they laughed. And when they didn't laugh, they touched. And when they didn't touch, they still looked at each other like the first morning on the sidewalk. Before the fame, before the gallery launches, before her name was on his company's charity board, before the miscarriages, before the silence. Back then, She painted with her eyes closed sometimes, just for fun. He used to stand behind her, arms around her waist, whispering what colors to pick. "Trust me," he'd say. And she did, every time. But that trust is delicate. It doesn't crack. It dissolves, in small, invisible places, until one day you wake up next to someone who no longer sees you. Or worse, someone who still does, but doesn't reach for you anymore. They were a headline before they ever agreed to be one. Power meets paint. Billionaire marries unknown artist in private rooftop ceremony. The press ate it up. The public speculated. Her old classmates texted after 5 years of silence. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but none of them saw what was real. Aaron and Calla didn't care. They woke up late, made burnt toast, took cold showers together because the penthouse plumber missed his appointment. They bought plants they didn't know how to take care of. They argued about whose music belonged in the shared playlist. They loved. And, for a long stretch of time, it felt unbreakable. Calla launched her youth art program the same month Aaron secured the stadium bid in San Diego. Neither of them saw it as competition. He donated land. She designed murals. He built futures in steel. She built hope in color. They weren't each other's escape. They were the reason each other didn't need one. But the first crack didn't come from betrayal. It came from the hospital room, the one with a white monitor, and a silence so loud it made Calla tremble. No heartbeat, no movement. The nurse didn't make eye contact when she said, "I'm so sorry." Aaron stood beside her, jaw clenched, hand gripping hers tighter than necessary. She didn't cry, not then. She stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on her belly. She whispered, "I'm broken." He said, "Don't say that." But it didn't matter. The seed was already planted, not in her body, in her mind. She slept more during the day, stopped going to the studio, turned down interviews, grants, awards. The light in her paintings dimmed. Colors became dull. Her brushstrokes lost direction. Aaron noticed. He offered to fly them out to Tuscany. Get space. Disconnect. She refused. Said it felt wrong to run away from something they hadn't processed yet. But she never processed it. She buried it. And in burying it, she buried herself. Aaron gave her space. Too much space. He kept their life spinning. Meetings, board seats, global deals. But emotionally, he paused. Every time he came home and saw the guest room door closed, he stopped himself from knocking. Every time she cried in the shower, he sat outside the door with headphones on, pretending not to hear. He loved her so much, he didn't want to be another burden. So he became invisible. One night, he came home early, found her curled up on the rug, surrounded by half-finished canvases. She was holding a wine bottle with both hands like it was a lifeline. She looked up at him with red eyes. "I can't paint anymore." He sat beside her, quiet. She leaned into him, but her voice shook. "I'm scared if I finish one, it'll mean I've moved on." He wanted to tell her she didn't have to, that they could carry the grief together, that he missed her even though she was right beside him. But all he said was, "Then don't finish it yet." That was his mistake. She didn't finish the painting. She didn't finish any of them. In time, they stopped sharing meals. They texted instead of talking. They started sleeping back to back. Then, in different rooms. The intimacy slipped out like air from a cracked window. No loud exit. No slam. Just silence. And then came the whispers. She never told him about Julian at first. Never mentioned his name. But Aaron found the gallery brochure in the recycling bin. Saw his name printed at the bottom. Julian Renard, curator. He noticed the sudden shift in her posture before art events. How she took longer to get ready. How she stood straighter when she mentioned the team. She told him. Julian respected her voice. Said he understood her vision. Aaron said nothing. But his chest burned. Because she used to say those exact things about him. One night, she came home humming. A tune he hadn't heard in months. She paused when she saw him sitting in the dark. "Didn't know you were back." "I live here," he replied. It wasn't sarcasm, just truth. She nodded. took off her shoes, said nothing more. He watched her walk to the bedroom and wondered when her joy stopped being his. CTA, second or mid-script engagement break. Do you think emotional distance starts with absence or silence? Which one is more dangerous in a relationship? Comment your thoughts below. Like this video if you believe grief should be carried, not ignored. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for stories that speak to the quiet corners of love. By their 4th anniversary, they didn't plan a dinner. She stayed late at the studio. He stayed late at the office. They exchanged text messages, dry, short, no emojis, no punctuation. That night, he lay on the couch. She walked past him holding a painting. He looked up. She didn't look back. She still wore her ring, so did he. But it no longer felt like a promise. It felt like a memory. And memories don't hold you, they haunt you. Aaron started thinking in terms of risk management. If this were a business deal, he would have pulled out already. If this were an investment, he would have written it off. But this was her. This was the girl who once made ramen with him barefoot on the balcony. The one who danced in parking lots and whispered, "I love you," like it was a vow. He didn't want to let go, but he didn't know how to stay when he no longer recognized who she had become. Or worse, who he had become around her. One night, he stood in the doorway of her studio. She was asleep on the couch, paint smudged across her cheek, an unfinished canvas leaning against the wall. He saw a sketch, 2 birds, one facing forward, one facing away. He remembered when she painted them during their first year. It was about growth, she said, how sometimes people move in different directions and still love each other. He didn't think much of it back then. Now, it felt like prophecy. He closed the door quietly and made up his mind. Julien Reynard wasn't just charming, he was practiced. The kind of man who entered a room with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. French accented, stylish without effort, and surgically aware of his audience. He didn't just curate art, he curated attention. Calla met him at a charity gala Aaron sponsored but couldn't attend. She went alone. It was her first solo outing in months. The champagne was warm, the food forgettable, but the gallery pieces, on loan from 5 emerging artists, struck her like cold air. Real, raw, untamed. She stood quietly in front of a jagged oil piece of 2 hands pulling apart, paint cracked in the middle. "That one's about disappointment," a voice said beside her. "But it pretends to be about grief." She looked up. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. She recognized him from the panel boards, from the brochures she tossed into the trash unopened. Julien Reynard. He wore a navy turtleneck and spoke like everything had a hidden meaning. "I didn't say I liked it," Calla replied, still facing the canvas. He smirked. "You didn't have to. You're still staring." Their conversation lasted 15 minutes. That's all. But in that short time, she laughed more than she had in the past week. Not because he was funny, but because he was light, easy, unattached to the weight she carried. And when he complimented her name, Calla, like the lily, bold without trying, she didn't blush. She tilted her head and asked if he recycled compliments often. He didn't answer, just said, "Bold and clever," and walked off. She smiled. A real one. 2 weeks later, Julien emailed her through the non-profit hosting the gala, said he'd revisited her older work, asked if she'd consider contributing to a spring exhibit focused on grief and transformation. She almost declined. Then, she read the theme again. Grief, transformation, both lived in her spine now. She couldn't shake them. She agreed to submit a piece. That was the beginning. Aaron noticed the name early on. He didn't say anything. Not the first time Julien's name came up during dinner. Not the second time when he saw the gallery's invitation on the console table. But by the third time, when Calla mentioned she might attend the exhibit, "Is private prep night?" he asked. "Is this for the foundation or for you?" She blinked. "What? You're spending more time at this gallery than at your own studio." Her mouth opened, but no words came. He didn't press. He simply stood, took his plate to the sink and said, Don't forget to lock up. Calla told herself there was nothing inappropriate about Julian. He was attentive, yes, complimentary, often, but never disrespectful. She told herself he was a colleague, a creative, a man who saw her as more than a billionaire's wife, someone who didn't look at her and see failure or weight or brokenness. He never brought up her marriage, never asked questions about her private life, which, in her fragile state, felt like a form of kindness. But Aaron saw the shift, not just in how often she smiled at her phone, but in how she dressed again, how she started humming when she thought no one was home, how she had more patience for strangers than for him. Julian wasn't a threat. He was a mirror, a reflection of what she used to be, what she missed in herself, and Aaron couldn't compete with a ghost of her former joy. One evening, Julian called her instead of texting. She answered, hesitant. "Am I interrupting anything?" he asked. "No," she said. "He's in Singapore." Julian didn't comment. He asked her about the new piece she was working on. "It's unfinished," she told him. "But I think it's about numbness." "Numbness?" he asked softly. "Or waiting for feeling to return." Calla's breath caught, because that was it, exactly it. He said, "You don't have to explain it to me. I already see it in the lines." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, tears came without force. The next morning, Aaron returned unexpectedly. His meeting had been postponed. He stood in the doorway, watching her from across the room. She didn't notice him. She was painting, lost in it, alive in it. He couldn't remember the last time she looked that free around him. He didn't interrupt. He just walked into the guest room and shut the door. She never asked why he came home early. He never brought it up. That silence said everything. The offer came in a cream-colored envelope, sealed with gold foil. Inside was a formal invitation from the Palais des Lumières, a historic gallery in Paris, known for debuting Europe's most promising modern artists. Calla's painting, Muted Ache, had been selected for a private showcase curated by Julian himself. The theme, emotional evolution through grief. At the bottom of the invitation was a handwritten note. Some stories deserve a different city. Julian. She read it twice, then set it face down on the counter before Aaron walked in. That evening, they barely spoke. Calla reheated leftovers. Aaron didn't look up from his tablet. She sat across from him. Her hand grazed the envelope, then pulled away. "You have something to say?" he asked, still not looking at her. She froze. His tone was calm, too calm. She hesitated. "I was invited to a show. In Europe." He set the tablet down. "Where?" "Paris." He nodded once. "When?" She told him the dates. He nodded again, then picked the tablet back up. She wanted him to ask for details, for meaning, for reassurance. He didn't, and that made her feel even more unseen. Aaron already knew about the show. His assistant had flagged the gallery's announcement that morning. Julian's name was all over it. So was Calla's. But Aaron didn't bring it up. He'd learned something dangerous in the last few months. The less you demand from someone, the faster you see where their loyalties stand. And he was done pulling threads in silence. If she was going to leave, emotionally or otherwise, he wouldn't stop her. He would just prepare for the moment when she no longer looked back. Julian called the next day. Calla answered from her studio. "I assume you got the letter?" he asked. "I did." "Are you coming?" "I haven't decided yet." He paused. "Calla, this isn't just about a show, it's about a rebirth." She stayed quiet. "I'm not asking you to run away," he added. "I'm asking you to be seen." Her voice trembled. "I don't know what that even means anymore." "Yes," Julian said gently. "You do." That night, Aaron returned from a dinner meeting to find Calla asleep on the couch, envelope still in hand. He stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, her hair a mess, her thumb still pressed into the seal like she hadn't meant to fall asleep at all. He wanted to walk past her. He wanted to shake her awake and ask her if she still loved him. Instead, He walked to the guest room and shut the door. Again. The next day, Calla booked the flight. Business class. Solo. She didn't tell Aaron. She didn't hide it either. But he found out. From his assistant, again. She was updating his international security briefings, and flagged that. Mrs. Vale had a travel itinerary matching Julian's outbound flight. He read the report in silence, then closed the document. He didn't call Calla, didn't confront her. He just picked up his phone and called his real estate lawyer. In Paris, Calla's piece was hung front and center, muted greys, streaked blues, and a single burst of yellow near the heart of the canvas. It was raw, imperfect, honest. She stood beside it, trying to remember how she had painted it in one sitting. Eyes swollen from a night of unresolved arguments and suppressed tears. Julian hovered nearby. He never touched her, never crossed a line, but his presence felt like an invitation, not to passion, to escape. After the show, he offered her a drink at a rooftop bar overlooking the Seine. She agreed. They talked, laughed, remembered things they'd never lived. When he reached for her hand, she pulled back. "I'm still married," she said. He didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for anything." "I know," she said softly. "That's what makes it worse." She returned to New York 3 days later. Aaron wasn't home. The envelope with the gallery catalogue sat on the counter, opened. So did a file folder. Inside, a legal draft for property separation. Not divorce. Not yet. Just options. She sat down, stared at the paper. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She just whispered, "You already knew." And that made the silence feel final. The envelope was thick, white, unmarked, resting neatly on the kitchen counter, just beside the fruit bowl Calla hadn't touched in days. She thought it was mail at first, or another one of those sleek catalogues Aaron's name kept attracting. But when she opened it and unfolded the paper, her breath caught. It was a property deed, for her art studio, transferred to her name, fully paid. No note, no message, just her name and his signature on the final page. The exact same signature he used the day they bought the place together, when he told her, "I want this to be your world, not just your dream." She sank onto the stool beside the counter, gripping the page like it could answer all the questions piling up in her throat. He'd given her the studio, but it felt like a goodbye. She didn't try to call. What would she say? He hadn't fought, hadn't yelled, hadn't even asked for anything in return. Just gave the only thing that still had her name on it in his world. Calla sat still for a long time, replaying the last few weeks. The Paris trip, Julian's presence, her absence, Aaron's silence. His precision wasn't limited to business. He made decisions like he signed deals, with finality. This wasn't anger. It was closure. That afternoon, she found herself walking the long way to the studio. Not driving, not calling a car, just walking. She passed familiar storefronts, street performers, coffee carts, the same places she used to pass when she first met him, when they used to walk together, fingers linked, dreaming about one day owning something real, permanent. Now she did, alone. When she reached the studio, the key still worked. Everything inside was untouched. The sunlight spilled through the skylights just like it used to when she'd open early to set up for the kids. The paints were all stacked neatly, the brushes cleaned and hung. She walked slowly to the farthest wall, where her favorite mural lived. 2 figures in silhouette, one painted in full color, the other fading in blue. It was the first piece she ever made after the miscarriage. She never titled it, but she always knew what it meant. One stayed, the other disappeared. Calla sat on the floor, back against the wall, and pulled her knees to her chest. The guilt rose sharp and fast. She hadn't cheated, not with her body, but with her spirit. Yes, she gave someone else her stories, her laughter, her attention. She didn't defend Aaron when Julian made quiet digs about men who consume but never feel. She didn't mention her marriage in front of the gallery sponsors. And worst of all, she let herself enjoy the illusion of being seen by someone new. even though the only man who ever truly saw her had now stepped away. She stayed in the studio till after dark. Didn't paint, didn't clean. She just sat there, listening to the silence that used to feel sacred. Now it felt like judgment. Aaron hadn't asked her to leave. He'd simply stepped out of the frame. No speech, no demands. That was worse than anger. It was mercy, and mercy stung when you knew you didn't deserve it. She walked home slowly, found the penthouse empty. Of course it was. His bags were gone. His scent, faint. The glass on his nightstand, missing. She went into their shared closet. His side was bare. Only one item remained. A note tucked into the pocket of the navy suit jacket he wore the night they celebrated her first exhibition. She unfolded it with shaking hands. It wasn't a message. It was a receipt. Plane ticket. One way. No return. Destination, Singapore. Departure that morning. Calla sat on the edge of the bed. The one they used to collapse into after long nights. The one where they shared plans and cravings and half-slept conversations at 2 a.m. Now it felt too big, too cold. She lay down anyway, facing the side he used to sleep on, and whispered, "I'm sorry," but there was no one there to hear it. The next morning, the sun rose like it didn't know anything had changed. Calla stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug Aaron once said reminded him of her, slightly off-center but impossible to replace. She didn't drink it. She stared out the window, clutching the ceramic with both hands. She hadn't cried yet. She thought grief came like a wave. But this wasn't that. This was fog. Slow, heavy, hard to see through. The kind you don't notice until you've walked hours in the wrong direction. She didn't call her sister, didn't answer texts, didn't check social media. She turned off her phone entirely and left it in a drawer. For 2 days, she did nothing. Didn't go to the studio, didn't paint, didn't eat more than toast and cold tea. She just sat, by the window, by the bed, by the front door, like her body didn't know where it belonged. The penthouse was too quiet. Every sound echoed. Every corner held a memory. Of him, of them, of the girl she used to be. She found herself talking aloud sometimes. Once, to the painting he'd secretly commissioned from one of her old students. It still hung near the staircase, an abstract mix of blue and red, titled Roots and Wreckage. She whispered, "Do you think I broke him?" The painting didn't answer, but her own heart did. Yes. On the 3rd day, she picked up her phone, turned it on. Dozens of messages buzzed in. 2 from her sister, 1 from the gallery, 4 from Julian. The first one, "Are you okay? I heard Aaron's out of the country." The second, "I'm here if you need space to breathe." The third, "You're not the villain, Calla. You just needed light." The fourth was only a question mark. She stared at them all. No anger, no drama. Just enough words to make her feel like someone still wanted to fix what she'd broken. She hovered her thumb over the reply box, then stopped, closed her eyes. She remembered Aaron's voice in that cold kitchen saying, "You gave him the part of you that used to belong to us." And suddenly, she knew. She couldn't answer Julian, because if she did, she'd be running again. She opened her contacts, scrolled down, paused, and deleted his name. No second thought, no saved backup, just a full delete. Then she powered off the phone again, let the silence wrap around her like a weighted blanket. It hurt, but it was honest. Later that day, she walked into her closet and started packing. Not to run, to breathe. She didn't want the penthouse, didn't want the city skyline or the elevator with the private key. She wanted stillness, a place where she could stop remembering everything all at once. She found a rental listing in Vermont, small, plain, surrounded by trees. No luxury, no marble, just space and silence. She booked it for 2 months. No return ticket. The night before she left, she stood in the doorway of their bedroom one last time, touched the edge of the bed, looked at the photo on the dresser, one of the few they took on their wedding day. No makeup, no suit, just wind in her hair and his forehead pressed to hers. She left the photo there, not out of spite, out of respect. Some endings don't need fire. They need quiet. The doorman offered to help with her luggage. She declined. She wanted to carry the weight herself. She walked past the lobby mirror and barely recognized her reflection. Not because of sorrow, but because, for the first time in a long while, she looked like someone facing the truth without flinching. As the car pulled away from the curb, she glanced up at the window of the penthouse. She half expected to see him there, but it was empty, and maybe that was fitting. They had loved. They had failed, and now they were both learning how to leave without destroying what they once built. The house in Vermont was small, not quaint, not curated, just plain. Wooden floors that creaked under bare feet, windows that opened with a stubborn groan, a fireplace that smelled like old pine, no elevator, no marble, no glass walls or imported faucets. It was quiet. Calla didn't decorate. She unpacked only what she needed: jeans, 2 sweaters, 1 hoodie that still smelled faintly of Aaron's cologne. She slept on the twin bed in the guest room instead of the master. No mirrors in the hallway, no reminders of posture, angles or appearances. Just space, to breathe, to break, to rebuild. In the first week, she walked the dirt trail behind the house every morning. Mile long, no destination, just loops. Her boots got muddy. Her muscles ached. She kept walking. The silence helped. No emails, no gallery invites, no curated sympathy, just the air, her breath, and the long overdue realization that grief doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes when everything else finally stops moving. The second week, she picked up her sketchbook, not to make art, to scribble, shapes, lines, fragments of ideas she didn't understand yet. She drew birds, broken picture frames, unlit candles, the kind of things she used to laugh at in student submissions for being too on the nose. But now, it all made sense. Pain doesn't ask for elegance. It asks for honesty, and for once, she wasn't creating for a gallery, or Julian, or social media, or even Aaron. She was sketching for herself. On the 15th day, she visited the general store for eggs and pens. The cashier was a girl in her early 20s who recognized her name from a grant application Calla once approved back when she ran the Youth Art Foundation. "You the Calla Vale?" she asked, cheeks flushed. Calla hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Used to be." The girl smiled. "I heard what you did with those students in Brooklyn. My cousin still paints because of your workshops." Calla didn't know what to say, so she smiled. Not out of pride, out of surprise. She hadn't felt useful in a long time. That night, Calla sat by the fireplace with her sketchbook on her knees. She wasn't thinking of Aaron. She wasn't thinking of Julian. She was thinking of the kids she used to teach, the ones who painted out their grief before they knew how to spell it. She thought about restarting the program, privately, quietly, something small, free. Just a few easels and a safe space. Something real, something without paperwork or politics or camera crews. But when she opened the program's site the next morning, her heart dropped. The non-profit had frozen her program's funding. Budget reallocation. 3 words that changed everything. She sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the screen. Her studio back in the city was paid off thanks to Aaron, but the operating costs for the foundation had always come from donor support, and she'd stepped away too long. They'd moved on. She felt it in her chest, the familiar tightening, that creeping voice. You were never supposed to be permanent. That afternoon, she called her old assistant, asked if anything could be done. He sighed. "There's one possibility, but you're not going to like it." She raised a brow. "Try me." Someone submitted a major donation to the youth program yesterday. She blinked. What? It was anonymous, came through a blind trust. But Calla, there was a symbol. On the memo line, her throat tightened. Paintbrush crossed with a key? Yes. She closed her eyes. Of course it was him. Only Aaron would donate a six-figure sum and say nothing. No call, no lecture, no signature, just quiet support. As if to say, I still want your dream to live, even if we don't. She sat alone in the Vermont kitchen for hours. The light changed. The kettle went cold. The logs in the fireplace turned to ash. She didn't call him, didn't write. But she whispered something aloud, soft and shaky. Thank you. And even though he wasn't there to hear it, she knew he would have understood. Because silence had always been their language, when love got too heavy to hold with words. The barn wasn't perfect. Leaky roof, squeaky floorboards, a faint smell of hay and dust that lingered no matter how much she aired it out. But it had light, long windows that caught the morning sun and made it feel like the walls were breathing. That was enough. Calla set up 5 easels along the back wall. No overheads, no donations. Just her old brushes, leftover canvas rolls, and a dusty box of paints she brought up from the city. The first day, only 3 kids showed up. One brought her little brother. Another had no idea what acrylic was. Calla smiled at them anyway. She didn't tell them who she used to be. She just said, we're here to feel. That's it. And they painted. Messy, wild, loud strokes with no rules. She opened the barn every Tuesday and Thursday after that. The group grew slowly. 7 kids. Then 11. A few teens. 1 grandmother. A single father who sat quietly in the corner and painted trees over and over again. No one talked about what brought them there. They didn't need to. The paint did it for them. One afternoon, a girl named Melina, 12 years old, quiet, always drew wolves, stood beside Calla's stool and asked, "Do you ever paint for yourself?" Calla looked up, startled. Not lately." "Why not?" Melina asked, blunt, in the way only kids can be. Calla didn't answer right away. She thought about it later that night, sat at the little wooden desk in her room, staring at a blank sheet of canvas paper. And for the first time in over a year, she picked up a brush for herself. Not to teach, not to explain, to feel. She didn't finish the piece, but she didn't tear it up either. She let it sit there, wet, messy, honest. Across the world, in a private conference room in Singapore, Aaron sat at a table while 2 executives debated contract clauses. He wasn't listening. His mind was somewhere else. His phone vibrated once. A message. Update received. Youth Barn Program. Attendance 15. First week complete. Photos attached. He clicked open the image. No faces. Just backs. Children painting. Brushes flying. A beam of light cutting through the dust like a stage. And at the center, Calla, hair tied up, smock half covered in red and blue paint, smiling. She wasn't posing. She wasn't performing. She looked alive. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen that expression in 2 years. He didn't reply. Didn't forward the image to anyone. He just locked the screen and exhaled. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was relieved. She was finding her way again, without him, and even though a part of him ached to be beside her, to hear her voice, to watch her brush, dance across the canvas, he knew that sometimes love means stepping out of the frame, so the picture can focus again. That night in Vermont, Calla left the studio door open long after sunset. She stood outside, barefoot, the grass cool against her feet. She looked up at the sky, stars scattered across the deep, dark blue. She thought of him, not with pain, but with gratitude, because some people don't disappear. They step aside, to give you room, to remember yourself. She didn't know if he'd ever come back. She didn't know if she wanted him to. But she knew this. She was no longer angry. Not with him, not with herself. And that was the first time in a long while she felt like she could breathe. Inside, the unfinished painting still sat on the desk. She added a single yellow streak to the center. Bright, unapologetic, and then walked away. She didn't need to finish it tonight. The healing had already begun. Aaron returned to New York in early spring. The city hadn't changed. The skyline still pierced the clouds. The streets still moved with urgency. But something in him had shifted. He moved back into his Chelsea apartment, not the penthouse. The penthouse held too many ghosts. Here, the walls were bare, the air clean. The silence didn't weigh as much. He didn't unpack everything. Only the basics. Just enough to function. Just enough to feel alone, but not broken. The first week back, his assistant brought in a stack of documents. Half were business-related. Contracts, expansions, new board offers. The rest, legal options, titles, assets, division outlines. At the top of the stack, an envelope with the words property distribution, marital agreement draft 2. He didn't open it. He didn't have the energy to read what he already knew, that he had walked away from a marriage with everything he needed and nothing he wanted. That evening, he made himself coffee in the dark. No staff, no noise, just the sound of the kettle and the ticking of a vintage wall clock. He stood at the window, watching taillights blur below. A year ago, this silence would have driven him mad. Now, he wore it like armor. 3 days later, his concierge buzzed him. "Package just delivered, sir." "No return label." He nodded. "Send it up." Minutes later, a long, narrow box sat on his kitchen island. No note, no name, just a familiar shipping tag, one used by an independent courier caller, often used for delivering delicate art. His breath caught. He opened it slowly. Inside was a wrapped canvas. No frame, no signature. He peeled back the protective layer and froze. It was her. Not a portrait, not a scene, a feeling. Bold strokes of color crashing into silence. Grief shaped like motion. Blue slashed with white. Shadows outlined in silver. And in the middle, just one clean gold stroke. Hope. He touched the edge of the canvas. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. He just stood there, the city spinning behind him, holding the one thing she'd never given him since the split, a piece of herself. Not a message, not a memory. Her art, her truth, her heart raw on canvas. He leaned the painting against the wall, sat on the floor, and stared. For minutes, for hours. He didn't move until the sky turned pink and the first rays of morning painted the floor in warmth. Later that day, Aaron took the canvas to a small private studio he used when he needed to disconnect from his empire. He hung it on the only wall with light. He didn't touch it, didn't photograph it, didn't tell a soul. It wasn't for display. It was for stillness, for listening. That evening, he walked through the park alone. No driver, no security, just him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man abandoned. He felt like a man released. Kala wasn't asking for reconciliation, but she had given him something priceless. Proof that the version of her he fell in love with still existed. That somewhere inside, her flame still burned, and he didn't need to hold it anymore to honor it. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank message, typed, "You still paint like truth lives in your bones." He hovered over send, then deleted the message. Not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't required. She already knew. The invitation came in the mail, folded neatly in a cream envelope. Not digital, not flashy, just simple cardstock with a small logo in the corner. Northeast Youth Creative Summit. Kala stared at it longer than she meant to. An invite to speak. Keynote opportunity, it read. A brief note was scribbled at the bottom, in pen, not printed. "We admire your work with the Youth Barn program. Would love to have your voice." She almost said no. Public events weren't in her world anymore. Not since New York. Not since the silence swallowed the version of her that once felt proud standing behind a microphone. But something about the tone, humble, not pushy, made her pause. They weren't asking for the woman who used to headline gallery panels. They were asking for the woman who showed up in muddy boots and let kids throw paint with no judgment. She said yes. 3 weeks later, she found herself in a modest town hall. Folding chairs. Bright fluorescent lights. Coffee in paper cups. Not a donor in sight. Just young people, some wide-eyed, others restless, and a few parents watching from the corners of the room. Calla sat backstage, holding her notes. She wasn't nervous. She was unsure. Unsure if her voice still held meaning. Unsure if the path she was on had built anything more than distance. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, walked up to the podium, and told the truth. She spoke for 15 minutes. Not about success, not about technique, about failure. The kind that creeps in slowly. The kind you cause. The kind you carry. She talked about losing direction, about finding it again in a broken barn full of kids who didn't need her past. They needed her presence. She told them to paint their pain, even if it's ugly, especially when it is. And when she stepped off stage, the applause wasn't loud. It was real. A small girl approached her afterward. Couldn't have been older than 11. Shy, eyes too big for her frame. She handed Calla a folded paper and said, "Someone asked me to give you this." Before Calla could ask who, the girl darted off toward the exit. She opened the paper slowly. One sentence. "You didn't disappear. You just paused." Her fingers trembled. She knew that handwriting. Slanted, sharp, clean. Aaron. She looked around the room. Scanned the edges. No sign of him. No flash of a dark suit. No familiar profile. But that note? It was his voice on the page. Simple, direct, forgiving. She sat down in the empty chair nearby and held the paper to her chest. He had been there. He'd watched. He hadn't interrupted, just supported. From a distance, like always. Have you ever had someone say exactly what you needed to hear without being asked? A note, a message, a look? Share what it was. Like this, if you believe some of the deepest love is spoken in silence. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, because stories like this don't end in noise. They end in truth. She left the summit quietly. No photos, no interviews. She went back to Vermont and hung the note by her studio window. Not framed, just pinned. To remind herself, she hadn't vanished. She had paused. And maybe she was ready to keep going. That evening, she stood at the front of the barn and watched the kids paint. Not as a teacher, not as a mentor, as someone learning again. A boy named Kylan waved at her with a brush full of blue and asked, "Miss Calla, what color is peace?" She smiled, walked over, dipped her fingers into yellow, and said, "Sometimes it looks like light." Aaron hadn't returned to the private studio in months, not since the painting arrived. But today, something told him to go. He walked in alone. No assistant, no distractions, just the click of the door behind him and the quiet hum of the city outside. The room was the same, blank walls, a single window, neutral light. Nothing to demand attention except what hung on the center wall. Her painting, untitled, still leaned where he'd left it, angled to catch the sunrise. He stood in front of it for a long time, arms crossed, back straight, breathing slow. It was the only piece of hers he had ever owned. She had refused to sell him any when they were married. "You don't need to buy my art," she used to say. "You live in it." Now, here it was, gifted, not sold, unframed, unsigned, but unmistakably hers. The textures, the movement, the restraint. She used to paint like the world owed her nothing, and everything all at once. Now, she painted like someone who knew what loss meant, and still chose to create. He pulled out his phone, opened his voice recorder, paused, then hit record. "I don't know if I'll send this. Maybe I just need to say it once." He paced slowly. "Do you remember our wedding vows? You didn't want to write them down. Said they'd feel rehearsed. You wanted to speak from memory, from feeling. I did the opposite. I had mine memorized a week early. I remember standing there, wind in your hair, you in that ridiculous thrifted dress with a rip in the hem. And I remember saying I'd never let silence come between us." He paused. "And I did. I let it all grow. The distance, the resentment, the assumptions. I didn't fight for you when I should have. I thought giving you space was the answer, but space turned into absence. And you turned to someone else, because I wasn't there when it counted." He exhaled, not shaky, steady. "I'm not blaming you, Calla. I'm saying I see it now. And I'm sorry." He hit stop, didn't play it back, didn't name the file, just let it sit there on his screen, unsent. He didn't know if she'd ever hear it. He didn't know if she'd want to. But some things needed to be said, even if the only person listening was the man saying them. That evening, his assistant forwarded him a small package. "No return label," she said, "but we traced it. Came through the same courier Calla used before." Inside was a small square canvas, thinner than the last, a single brushstroke of gold across a white background. In the bottom right corner, written so faintly it was barely visible, "Still breathing." He smiled, just once, then leaned the new piece beside the first. Didn't hang it, didn't frame it, just looked. 2 pieces, one full of chaos, one simple. Together they told the whole story. And maybe that was the closest they'd get to closure. Or maybe it was the start of something else. He didn't know yet. He was still breathing too. The barn was full, more students than ever before. Some standing, some sitting on the floor, all holding brushes, sponges, pencils, whatever they could get their hands on. Calla stood at the front, barefoot, paint-stained jeans rolled at the ankles, sleeves pushed to the elbows. Her hair was a mess. Her voice was calm. Today's theme was simple. What does trust look like? Some kids asked questions. Others just started painting. No one overthought it. That was the point. Let feeling lead. Let truth shape the edges. One girl drew a ladder reaching into the clouds. A boy painted 2 hands, one larger than the other, gripping tight. A teenager filled her canvas with locks, padlocks, door locks, hearts with keyholes. Calla didn't correct. She didn't offer suggestions. She walked between them quietly, watching them pour stories into silence. By the end of the class, the sun had dipped low. The barn glowed gold. Calla sat on the steps outside, sipping warm tea, shoes kicked off, eyes closed. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She just liked the stillness. When she stood to pack up, she found something tucked inside her bag. A folded piece of brown paper. No name. No logo. She unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, blocky. Not Aaron, but familiar. "Miss Calla, years ago you spoke at my high school, told me my anger could be shaped into something useful. You gave me a paintbrush and asked me to draw the thing I feared most. That changed everything. I now work for a non-profit funded by a man who asked me to never speak his name, but I figured you should know. He funds 6 youth art programs under your name. He says it's yours. He's just keeping the lights on." Calla froze. Her knees felt weak. She sat down on the studio floor. 6 programs, under her name, not his. She covered her mouth. This wasn't pity. This was love. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that doesn't need to be seen. The kind that protects even when it hurts. She remembered something Aaron once said. People with real power don't need to make noise. They move like gravity, quiet, constant, inescapable. He hadn't just let her go. He had made sure the best parts of her work lived on, even when she didn't know how to carry them herself. That night, Calla didn't sleep. She painted 3 canvases, all in silence. No references, no prep, just feeling. The last one was her favorite. Black base, white streaks, a gold line down the center. Simple, honest. She wrote one sentence on the back: "You never stopped protecting me." She didn't know if she'd send it. She didn't know if she had to. Sometimes, what matters most isn't returned. It's recognized. The next morning, she pinned the note inside the barn. Not for the kids, for herself. Because if someone could believe in her dream enough to fund it when she disappeared, then maybe she hadn't failed as deeply as she once believed. She hadn't vanished. She had been carried. And now, it was time to walk again. The gallery was private. No red carpet, no press. Just a rented industrial space in Brooklyn. Exposed beams, rough brick, walls, and a playlist of slow jazz humming through hidden speakers. Aaron walked in unnoticed. He preferred it that way. He wore black, no tie, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room like he was searching for a truth too delicate to name. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to see. Tonight's show was part of a youth art grant he'd quietly sponsored, one of 6 programs that had grown roots under Kala's name. He never showed up to these things. He sent checks, hired facilitators, stayed in the shadows, but something about this one felt necessary. Not urgent, personal. He moved through the space slowly, pausing at each canvas, nodding at the artist's statements scribbled in chalk beside each frame. Grief, loss, abandonment, but also hope. And somewhere between a painting of cracked eggshells and a mixed media piece titled Unsaid, he found it. A canvas framed in raw wood, off-center brushwork, unbalanced colors, imperfect edges, but something in it pulled him still. A plaque hung below it, The Quiet Room, by Asha L., age 16, inspired by Miss Kala. He read the statement. This is how she made us feel, like even the silent parts of us were worth something. She never needed to say the right thing, she just stayed. That was enough. Aaron swallowed hard, because that, right there, was who Kala was before the silence took her, before the weight of grief made her disappear behind polite smiles and distant eyes. She hadn't changed. She had just paused. Like he had. A woman approached him, one of the coordinators. You helped fund this program, she said gently. Would you like to say something before we close out? He looked at her, shook his head, then stopped. Actually, he turned back to the painting, let out a quiet breath, then said, There's someone behind this who deserves more credit than I do. She taught me that silence isn't absence, and that protecting someone's dream can be the loudest kind of love there is. The coordinator smiled. Is she here tonight? No, he replied, not yet. After the show, Aaron stayed behind as guests filtered out. He stood alone in front of the quiet room, arms folded, head tilted slightly. His driver waited outside, but he wasn't ready to leave. He stared at the painting like it held an answer. And maybe it did. Not a reunion, not a second chance, but a bridge. Back to something honest. He pulled out his phone, typed a name into his contacts, paused, then said it aloud for the first time in months. Kala. He didn't press call. Not yet. But he didn't close the screen either. He turned to the coordinator. Where's this artist from? He asked. She's part of a rural satellite group, upstate, connected to the youth barn. The youth barn. Of course. That meant Kala had seen this painting too. He nodded slowly, then whispered, more to himself than to her. I think I might be ready to see her. The gravel crunched beneath Aaron's shoes as he stepped out of the car. The barn stood at the edge of the hill, weathered wood, faded red siding, and warm light spilling out from its windows like an invitation. He didn't walk in, not right away. He stood in the shadows by a tree line, hands in his coat pockets, watching. Inside, the space buzzed with quiet energy. Children scattered across paint-splattered floors. Laughter, brushes tapping canvas, music playing low in the background. Something soft and slow, like a heartbeat trying to be brave. And there she was, Kala, standing at the center, arms outstretched, gesturing as she explained something about movement in brushstrokes. Her jeans were smeared in blue. A pencil was tucked behind her ear. She wasn't performing. She was present, completely, and it hit him. This wasn't where she escaped to. This was where she returned to herself. He stepped closer, just enough to hear her voice through the open barn doors. And sometimes the paint won't do what you want. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you listened. The kids nodded. A few kept painting. She walked from easel to easel, correcting nothing, encouraging everything. He smiled. The Kala he fell for was still in there, alive and bright, even if quieter now. He took one more step forward, then stopped. A small crash came from inside. Glass. A yelp. Kala dropped her brush and ran across the room. A boy, maybe 8 years old, was holding his wrist, tears welling in his eyes. A jar of water shattered at his feet. Paint covered the floor and smeared across his shirt. "I'm okay," he stammered, even as the pain climbed his face. Kala knelt beside him, trying to examine the wrist. Her hands shook. I need a towel," she said to one of the other kids. "No, wait, a cloth. Clean." And someone grabbed the first aid kit. "We have one, right?" Panic. She was trying to hold it in, but her eyes were wide, breathing uneven. That moment, her fear, her flurry of movement, the tremble in her voice, it broke Aaron's silence. He stepped inside. Calm, measured, direct. "Let me help." Kala froze. So did the kids. She turned her head slowly, as if her ears couldn't be trusted. He was already beside her, kneeling. "May I?" he asked gently. Eyes on the boy. She nodded, too stunned to speak. Aaron took the boy's hand, inspected the wrist. "It's not broken, just a strain. But let's wrap it up to be sure." He turned to a teenager standing nearby. "Gloves, gauze." "In that red box behind you." The boy nodded, ran to get it. Aaron looked at Kala again. She was still on her knees, hands hovering, heart in her throat. But her eyes were locked on him like she didn't know whether to cry or breathe. "You came," she whispered. He didn't smile, didn't joke, just looked at her and said, "I never left." Have you ever seen someone step back into your life just when you stopped hoping they would? What did it change? Tell us in the comments. Like this. If you believe some reunions don't need planning, they need timing. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for stories that don't chase drama, but chase meaning. Once the boy was calm, cleaned, and seated in the corner with a juice box, Aaron stood. Kala followed him outside. They didn't speak for a while, just stood under the tree line, wind threading through the quiet between them. Finally she asked, "Why now?" He stared ahead. I watched, from a distance, for a long time, and I wasn't sure if showing up would help or reopen everything we worked so hard to close. She turned to him. "And now?" "I'm still not sure," he said. "But when I saw you panic, I moved without thinking." Kala smiled, barely. "You always moved fast," she said, "even when I didn't know how to catch up." Aaron looked at her, eyes steady. "I wasn't waiting for you to catch up," he said. "I was hoping you'd want to walk beside me again." She didn't answer, not with words. She stepped forward, closer, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough to hear his breath slow. They stood like that, not together, not apart, just still, alive. The next day, Kala opened the barn early. She hadn't planned to. Saturdays were usually quiet, a time to restock supplies, clean brushes, and prep materials for next week. But she knew he was still in town. She could feel it. Like gravity was slightly different. Like her balance had adjusted. She sent him a message. Short, simple. "Class starts at 9. You're welcome to sit in. No expectations, no follow-up. Just an open door." At 8:59, he walked in, coffee in hand. No suit, no bodyguards, just him. The version of Aaron Vale that the world never saw, but she always had. The one who paid attention without needing to be seen. The one who used to pick up her brushes off the floor before she even noticed they'd fallen. He sat in the back corner, didn't speak, didn't stare, just watched. The kids took to him quickly, not because of his name, because he listened. When one boy explained why he was painting fire instead of a tree, Aaron nodded like it made perfect sense. When another girl asked if her art was dumb, he tilted his head and said, "If it made you feel something, it already did more than most things do." Kala kept glancing toward him, not out of distraction, out of awareness. He wasn't just in the room, he was in the moment. And that changed the air, made it steadier, safer. After class, they sat on the back steps again. Same tree line, same soft wind. This time, closer, not shoulder to shoulder, but not far. A space that allowed breathing. That asked nothing. That welcomed everything. He broke the silence first. I used to wonder what would happen if we saw each other again. She didn't look at him. Did it feel how you expected? No, he said. It felt better. She smiled. Soft. Private. Do you still live in the penthouse? No, I gave it up. Too many ghosts? He shook his head. Too many memories I didn't want to ruin. She nodded. I moved into something smaller, quiet, rural. I know, he said, then added, I didn't watch everything. But I always made sure you were okay. She blinked, emotions rising. You didn't have to. I know, he said again. But I wanted to. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I hated you for leaving. I hated myself for not stopping you, he replied. Calla turned to him. Not defensive, not sad, just honest. I wanted you to fight for me. I was trying not to cage you. I wasn't asking for escape, she said. I was asking for a reason to stay. Aaron closed his eyes briefly. Then I failed you. She exhaled. And I failed us. They sat in silence for a while. Not heavy, not uncomfortable. Then, finally, she asked, if we started again, would you still choose me? He looked at her and answered without blinking. I'd choose you faster. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Even knowing everything? Especially because of it. She blinked fast, looked down at her hands. I don't know who I am in your world anymore. He leaned in just enough to let his voice drop. You're the part I never replaced. She didn't cry. She didn't jump into his arms. She just let the words settle, like soil finally ready for something to grow again. They didn't go to a restaurant. Aaron asked if she'd have dinner with him, and Calla simply said, there's soup on the stove. They sat at the small wooden table inside her Vermont rental. 2 bowls, 2 glasses of water, no distractions. The only sound was the quiet hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock on the wall. They ate slowly. No performance, no tension, just 2 people sharing space after spending a year learning how to survive alone. When the meal was done, she poured him tea, just like she used to. He thanked her, not with words. I thought you'd get remarried, she said after a while. He looked up. I didn't want to. She didn't ask if he'd dated. She didn't want to know. And he didn't ask either. Some things didn't matter anymore, not compared to what sat between them now. Peace. Why didn't you call? She asked softly. I was afraid I'd pull you back before you were ready, he answered. She nodded. I wouldn't have picked up. I know. He stirred his tea. I was angry, she admitted. So was I. I blamed you. He looked at her. I blamed you too. Silence. Then she added, but I forgave you before I forgave myself. Calla got up and brought over a canvas. Blank. I haven't painted for anyone in a long time, she said. He didn't ask her to. He didn't offer to help. He just waited. She dipped her brush into yellow. Started with 1 line. Then another. As she painted, he asked, would you ever come back? She paused. To New York? He nodded. To us? She turned to him. I'm not the same person I was. Good, he said. Neither am I. They both looked down at the painting. It was messy, unfinished, a beginning, not a masterpiece. Aaron leaned forward, elbows on the table. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. I'm asking if we can walk forward, side by side. She didn't smile. Not fully, but her eyes softened. She looked at the painting. At him. At her hands. Then said, you'll have to keep pace with me this time. I will, he said. She dipped her brush again. Then added a streak of blue right across the yellow. Not to cover it. To balance it. Calla stepped out of the cab, heart thumping as she stared up at the studio building in Soho. The same one Aaron had once bought and placed in her name. It hadn't changed. Still brick, still bold, still home to the paint-smudged dreams of dozens of kids who walked through its doors. She hadn't been back in almost a year. Her staff had kept it running. Ella, Marco, Nina. They sent updates, photos, notes from students. But now, she had to see it herself. Inside, sunlight poured through the skylights. The wooden floors creaked in that familiar way beneath her flats. She walked slowly, past the front desk, past the tall hallway with its mismatched gallery of student work, until she reached the inner courtyard. The fountain was still there. The mosaic tiles she'd helped the kids lay were brighter than ever. Someone had maintained them. Then, a voice from behind her. "You're early." She turned. Aaron stood in the archway, suit jacket in one hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "I'm always early when I care," she replied. He smiled, small, gentle, honest. They walked side by side, their footsteps echoing softly as they passed. Classrooms filled with the scent of linseed oil and creativity. "I heard your last exhibit raised enough to fund another wing," he said. She nodded. "We're starting with a ceramics studio." He stopped at a door, opened it, let her go in first. Inside was a single easel, and on it, something that made her breath hitch, a painting. The style was unmistakably hers, but it wasn't hers. Brush strokes bold but patient. The colors, blue and yellow, layered with soft white. A girl with her back to the viewer, looking out at a city skyline. In her hand, a single paintbrush. But that wasn't what made Calla step closer, hand trembling. At the bottom corner of the canvas, carved into the wooden frame, not painted but etched, was a tiny symbol. A paintbrush crossed with a key. The same one Aaron used when he signed that anonymous check. "I didn't paint that," she whispered. "I know." "Then who did?" He paused. "I hired a student, told them the story of us, asked them to show me what they felt." She turned to him. "You told them everything?" "No. I told them what mattered." She didn't ask what that was. Her eyes stayed on the brush, the key, the skyline. Aaron moved beside her, not touching, just close. "I didn't bring you here to restart anything," he said quietly. "I brought you here so you'd remember it didn't all fall apart." Calla blinked fast. "I do remember. I forgot," he admitted. She looked up at him and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Not regret, not grief. He stepped back. "There's more I want to show you," he said. She followed him down another hallway, but stopped when she saw what was on the wall. Photos, not of them, of the students. Kids holding up paintings, sculptures, letters, all framed. At the center, a plaque. The Billionaire'S Center for Creative Healing. Calla touched it. Her name, his name. Together, still doing good, still making meaning. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting golden light across the polished floors. Calla stood in front of a wide window, arms folded lightly, watching the kids. In the courtyard below, paint on easels, their laughter faint but warm. Aaron sat behind her, leaning against the windowsill. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Then she asked, "Do you hate me?" His eyes didn't move from her. "No." She turned. "Why not?" Aaron let the question hang, then replied, "Because hating you would mean I forgot what we were. And I didn't." Calla stepped closer. "You were right," she said, "about what I gave away." He didn't respond. "I wasn't faithful to what we built, even if it wasn't physical. I let someone else into the part of me that should have only ever been yours." Her voice trembled, but she didn't break. "I needed someone to see me," she whispered. "And I didn't know how to ask you anymore. You were always working, always tired. I thought maybe if I disappeared emotionally you'd notice. But instead you just let me fade." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "I noticed," he said. She looked up. "You did. I just didn't know how to reach for you without making it worse." They stood in the quiet again. both holding truths that had once broken them. Now, spoken, they only healed. "I don't need us to go back," Calla said finally. He nodded. "I don't either." She smiled a little. "But I wouldn't mind walking forward, beside you, even if it's not the same path." Aaron exhaled slowly. "Do you think we're too different now?" "I think we've both changed, but not in ways that make love impossible, just in ways that make love wiser." He stared at her, not the way he used to, not with hunger, with understanding, respect. She took something from her bag, held it out to him. It was small, a key, old, rusted, still bearing flecks of blue paint from years ago. "You gave me this when you handed me the first lease papers," she said. He took it in his palm. "I kept it, even when I was angry, even when I blamed you for things that weren't your fault." Aaron ran his thumb over the paint. "I gave it to you because I wanted you to open every door," he said. "Then open one for me now," she said. They walked back into the main lobby. Calla turned to leave, but Aaron stopped her with a soft touch on her wrist. "Wait." He walked behind the counter, pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. She opened it. Inside, floor plans, permits, a blueprint. It was the same building, but with an entire new wing, workshops, a rooftop garden, residential units for kids in crisis, he explained. "I want to fund it, fully, quietly." Calla's breath caught. "But I want you to name it." She looked at him, eyes wide. He shrugged. "I figured you always knew how to name things better than me." She smiled. Something warm filled her chest. Not quite romantic, not quite platonic, something deeper. Gratitude, respect, maybe even love in a quieter, fuller form. She nodded. "I'll name it," she said. "But only if you let me bring you in to paint the first brick." He arched a brow. "Me? I'm a terrible painter. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be present." He nodded once, and for the first time in a long while, she saw the man who once danced with her in grocery aisles. Return. If you believe love isn't always about returning, but about choosing to show up wiser. If you believe quiet healing matters more than loud breakups. If you know that forgiveness takes strength, not weakness, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where love isn't always perfect, but it always teaches something real. Comment your favorite moment below, and share this story with someone who once walked away, but never truly left your heart.